Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the Values Jam guest session series. And Rhonda, brilliant to have you here. And to start with, please tell everybody about you and the great work that you do.
Well, thank you so much, Alan, for giving me this opportunity to share. My name is Rhonda Bowen. I am a global strategic communication guide. If you say you've never heard of that, that's probably right, because as far as I know, I'm the only person who talks about themselves that way. Global, because I've worked with people from more than 70 countries in person during my career. Strategic, because I'm helping them figure out how to talk to people from other cultures better, not only geographical, like I happen to be American but live in Germany. So that's the geographical part. But the other part is, of course, organizationally. Like, why can't people in engineering talk to people in marketing? That's also two totally different cultures that often have problems with each other. And the combination of geography plus organization often gives them insights into what happens. I believe very much in there's no one right answer for anything, and certainly not with communication. It's like walking. We all know how to walk, but there are officially 8 different ways in the world to walk. And you probably don't know all of them. And even if you did, you probably can't do them all. It's the same way with communication. We all talk, we all listen, but there are so many ways of doing it. And I believe very strongly in co-creating the solutions that people need within groups of people to make sure that everybody gets some value out of the conversation, but everybody brings their own wisdom. And I talk about whisperation in action. You bring wisdom to the group, you receive wisdom, or maybe you're actually looking for wisdom from people in the group. You then get inspired to go out and actually take action on what's going on.
Fantastic, thank you. And I love the idea of the wisdom of crowds. I've had some books published, but actually, I think that whole process is fundamentally flawed because the author, or maybe, you have two or three authors at most, they have a very, very narrow view. And like you, I tend to prefer to look to large groups of people, actually bringing them together with different perspectives. That's how you get the most interesting conversation. So, well, and how do people get hold of you?
Oh, well, I'd like to give everybody a gift for coming today and spending their time with us. You'll find in the description near this video, you will find a link to an assessment to find out about your strategic communication. There'll be some questions in there to find out which of the parts, 6 parts of communication as I define them, are the easiest ones for you to do, and which ones are maybe you're still looking for some help. And at the end, you will have the opportunity when you finish the assessment to get an overview of where you stand, but also there will be resources for each particular category. So if you'd like to find out more, you can go in and look at those. And if you'd like to have a conversation with me, there will be a way for you to set up a call so that you and I can talk about exactly what's going on in your communication and how I can support you in helping that.
Fantastic. That's really kind of you. And do you know what? Usually this comes at the end, right? When we've made people listen to the whole thing.
We
So
can do
that
it at the end again if we'd like. Yeah.
no, that's great. So now I'm just going to tip out the cards from the Values Jam deck, and there are 60 cards. So how many piles would you like me to make in front of me?
My number is 5.
Five. Okay, and these are going to be different sizes. And so there we are. There's the five, and I've got pile one on my left and pile five on my right. So which number pile would you like me to choose?
4.
Okay. So in pile four, we've just got seven cards, so a number between one and seven.
Then we're back to 4.
Okay. Oh, you've chosen one of my core values.
Oh, wonderful. Ah, okay, great.
So the first question is this: what does enjoyment mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Right. Well, if you take any word, I come from a language background, so I always go back to how are words put together and what do each of the individual pieces mean. When you look at the middle of it, it's joy. And that's obviously the feeling that we want to have when we're experiencing something, often not only with other people, but often together with other people, that makes us feel that it's a positive experience and that we go away with something that's good for us. The N means that it's combined with something, and the ment is the actual doing of it. So enjoyment can be just looking out the window and seeing a wonderful sunset, for example, or some kind of an animal running around in front of you. But enjoyment for me is usually the fact that I've worked together with people, have found a way to do something that brings them all their wispiration, and that then they have the opportunity to go forward and say, isn't this wonderful? Because now there is so much benefit from this. Joy for me is not the fleeting moment kind of joy. Joy is something that we hope we find in whatever situation or circumstance we're in, but that we take with us and it feeds us as we go forward.
What a great start. And I think the most important thing I heard there was this thing about enjoyment not being a fleeting moment. I share that with you absolutely, because those fleeting moments are kind of, what are they? They are not real in some ways. You know, you can get taken to a higher level for a couple of seconds, but then if you come back down to a whole different level, then you're not actually in such a great place. Whereas the way you described enjoyment is how I enjoy feeling it when it's with you on an ongoing basis. And that's not to say, like you say, that it's not fueled by individual experiences, but it's a bit like the emotional bank account, right? It's topping up your joy and maintaining it at a certain level. Okay, and when you hear the word enjoyment, what images come to mind? What sounds come to mind? And what feelings come to mind, Rhonda?
Okay. Let me start with the sounds because the first thing that I thought of when I saw joy was Beethoven. I play classical music and other kinds of music as well, and I have a picture of Beethoven hanging above my piano. And that happens to be the Moonlight Sonata. But what I really love, and because I'm American but live in Germany, which is part of the European Union, our song, if you will, is a song of joy from Beethoven. And therefore, for me, this idea of every time you hear this, and it's usually done with an orchestra and lots of people singing in a choir and all of those things, it's this huge explosion of feeling that you get from that. So for me, for music, I would say the sound I hear is Beethoven in my ear and all of the nice people singing and playing the music. The feeling I think, I don't know, many people have very different feelings depending on what happens in their bodies. I just found out recently a lot about my human design and found out that, which a lot of people talk about in general, but for me, my personal human design is I feel things in my gut. So the way I really feel good is if you have a really nice meal and you didn't do too much of it, and you have this nice warm feeling in your stomach about, oh, wasn't that such a nice meal? That's the kind of feeling I get with joy as well. Because as I said, according to my human design, I'm really based around my gut and my intuition. And therefore, all of those things that come, they come and settle there. They could be the things that are unsettling, but of course the joyful things are there, and it's that warm, fuzzy kind of a feeling that I personally get. And now I've forgotten the third one you asked. You asked for a sound, you asked for a feeling, and you asked for
Images.
images. Oh, images. Oh, that could be lots of things. My favorite image in the world, because it also shows one of my values, is moving from a caterpillar to a butterfly. And the caterpillar, when it's in this process of changing into a butterfly and it's in the cocoon, and you would think that that's probably not a very joyful process because something is leaving and then something very new is coming out. The joy of that is not for the caterpillar or for the butterfly because neither of them really knows what's going on. The joy for me is the process that a caterpillar does wonderful things and makes it possible to have butterflies on the one hand, but on the other hand, the butterfly is pulling from the essence and what is called then when the cocoon is made and inside there's the butterfly. what happens then is that the butterfly sort of decomposes, but that is the nourishment to make the butterfly.
Yeah.
And so neither of these things could exist on their own, but they are absolutely connected. And for me, joy is when we're with somebody else and that connection, there's something in between that makes that connection, like inside the cocoon. And maybe we can't even always find out what it is. Like the caterpillar really doesn't know, and the butterfly really doesn't know, but the magic is in the middle. And that's what I think of when I hear joy.
Okay. And for me, I think what I'm realizing about enjoyment is that, again, it's for me, it's this kind of quiet enjoyment that I relate to most easily. So if I think about a sound, it's that of appreciation.
Okay.
And for the image, it's a smile,
Mhm.
but not a kind of, it's not a little bit more than a Mona Lisa smile, but not an exaggerated smile.
Okay.
And the feeling is quite close to what you were describing after that delicious meal. But the word that I made a note of was contentment. It
Mhm.
was that just feeling of that's just enough and that's just right. And the other one that I made a note of was, and this is in response to you talking about how you see things from a gut perspective. I'm not, maybe you can tell me what this is for me, but it's the sun on my face that gives me enjoyment.
Mhm. That's interesting. I'm not an expert at human design, so I won't say anything about that. But what is interesting is that mine is an internal one and yours is an external one coming inside. So those
Yeah,
seem to be two different ways of approaching the same thing, which is great.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other two-dimensional thing I wanted to ask you about, you talked about enjoyment with somebody else.
Mhm.
And when you said that, I was thinking about how there is something really special about, for instance, being at a concert with other people and that level of enjoyment. But then on the other hand, I was thinking, well, actually, I can sit on my own and listen to an album from the beginning to the end and really, really enjoy that too.
Mhm.
So let's just explore that difference. What's that all about? Because they're both enjoyable.
Well, something that I've known for a very, very long time, a wonderful lady from your country many, many, many years ago gave me my first Myers-Briggs type indicator test. And I was doing it with a group of colleagues. And we were all in Germany, and most of us were not English speaking. I was one of the few who was a native speaker of English. And we all had the test, and she came back the next time, and she showed everybody their results. And she came to me last, and she looked at me and she said, "Rhonda, I checked your exam 3 times." And I thought, what am I doing wrong? I'm one of the few native speakers of English in the room. How could I screw this up so badly? I thought, yeah. And she looked at it and I said, well, did I make a mistake? Did I forget something? I had no idea what the problem was. And she said, no, 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 no. She said, you did everything right. She said, the exam goes from 0 to 60, like for extroverted or introverted. And she said, everybody in your group on all of the scales is somewhere between 0 and 10. On the introvert extrovert scale, everybody is between 0 and 8. You are a 48. I have never met a 48 in my entire life. And she said, I thought I messed up when I assessed the exam. So, first of all, I am an extremely extroverted person, which is what I always say to people, I can't think by myself. And when you say just sitting down and listening and enjoying something, for me, that's the thing because I'm always looking for the interaction. But that's because I am so overly extroverted compared to most people. And that is neither good nor bad in and of itself. But for me, if I want to do that, I would never sit down and listen to music. I would then sit down and play the piano because I'm doing something
Yeah,
and I'm getting something back, not only the acoustic, but I'm also getting the feeling, the haptic from the keys.
yeah,
And if there are other people around and they happen to come by and hear me playing the piano, then I'm getting the input. I'm always the person who needs the input. And that's why being an extrovert is so hard when people used to say to me, oh, we'll all come to the next meeting and have our best ideas, 3 best ideas for this topic. I would never have any ideas on my own. I would wait till people started talking and I'm a responder. I hear something and I get all of the new ideas, like the wonderful thing that we're doing today as well. And so, therefore, I never did the prep. And everybody said, "What did you bring with me?" I said, "You say something, I'll tell you something. It's okay." So, for me, joy is always this interaction. And even if it's just the interaction with my piano, for example, that's still the interaction. I'm not the type to sit around and just listen because I'm not getting the chance to do the output as
Yeah.
well. And I need both the input and the output.
And this probably is going a little bit off piece, but actually, it relates to values jam conversations. And it also relates, I think, to the way we conduct ourselves more generally, in that a lot of meetings, for instance, there's an agenda,
Mhm.
come prepared. And so, whilst that might feel a bit more orderly, to me, it seems that it's also a bit narrow-minded, because what you're actually doing is deciding where your curbstones are before you've even started. And why would you want to do that? And yet people tend to have a sense of security in that.
Well, you've just spoken to something that I've been working on for the last 37 years in my business that I've had. So, meetings are one of those things where I come from the US, and there was a book written in the 1860s about exactly how to do meetings, and it's called Robert's Rules of Order. I live in Germany. There is not even the German translation of this book, meaning the Germans, who everybody thinks are so terribly orderly in meetings, are not. And the Americans, who are always said to be all over the place, when it comes to meetings, the entire book tells you exactly how to do everything and exactly who's allowed to do what when. And the system is huge, and it's been around for almost 200 years. So the question is, what do people need in a meeting, and what makes the meeting efficient? And many people who cannot wing it, or are not good at responding, as is my strength, they need more background. They need more structure. They need to know we do this part first and then this part. They come prepared. They bring all their presentations and slides and overviews and whatever. And for them, that's fine, but that's what they need. If you go into a room and you let a whole bunch of people like me sit down, we will never get through the agenda, but we will all bring in something that's really, really good. And the question is, what circumstance are you in? How much time do you have? And if you need to be efficient, an agenda is a very effective way to do things. And for that, it's absolutely wonderful. I'm a global facilitator. I can sit in a room and I write up the agendas and I do all the things ahead of time to make sure the people stay on track. And I'm the one writing down how many minutes we're going to talk about this. And I close the meeting at exactly the right time. And everybody looks at me and says, "Rhonda, how can you do that?" I said, "I'm getting the input from the people, and my output is keeping us on track." That's my part when I facilitate. And so people always say, "Yeah, when we go to your meetings, Rhonda, they always finish on time." I said, "Yeah, because that's my job. And that's what I'm here for. If I'm a facilitator, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. If you're saying we have 10 hours to do brainstorming, I have other ways we can do that.
Sure.
But for meetings, especially, and if people have the next meeting to go to, then having this good sort of tight knit system is a very good thing. Having other systems, like I have 6 proprietary ways of doing what people normally call brainstorming, I have totally different ways of doing that, meaning having people think creatively in different ways than just throwing out things the way they normally do, gives people enough structure to get started, but leaves it open enough to have them give the opportunities for all of this. It doesn't need to be written on the paper already kinds of stuff. And that's why when you were talking about values, and that my top value is co-creation. And that's exactly what it is, getting all the people together and finding the best way to come up with the things that they really love.
Well, there's a parallel there, because one of my 5 core values is not co-creation, but I've called it creation,
Mm-hmm.
which is fresh thinking with others to
Mm-hmm.
create value.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I haven't actually met anybody else that has creation as a value. So yeah, and you've also reminded me. I sat on a global board, and the guy from the US actually was the only introvert in the group.
Ah,
And we had our quarterly board meetings, and the standard was that the minutes of the meeting would be sent out within 24 hours of the meeting taking place. And then I can't remember how this came about. It might have been Myers-Briggs actually that opened this discussion up. But Glenn, the guy, explained how he really didn't feel comfortable answering in the moment in the meeting,
mm,
and that often things would come to him 2 or 3 days later.
yes.
And so we agreed that the minutes would go out with his additional input 3 days after the meeting rather than one day after the meeting. And everybody got so much more out of those sessions after that because there was this mutual understanding and a collective understanding of the benefit of doing that. So let's get really practical with enjoyment now, and let's go to the other side of the coin. And so my question is, where have you noticed a lack of enjoyment?
Okay. I would say asking people or demanding of people or forcing people to be somebody that they're not. And I see so many people. I have worked with, as I said, I've had my business now for 37 years. I have worked with thousands of people, as I said, in more than 70 countries, in lots of very big corporations where there's a standard and there's a system, and we always do it like this. One of those companies was a global chemical company, and I worked with the people who were registering new products with national governments. So there was this huge thing on the side of the company. This is the way we do all these things. Each government had its own way of making sure that everything was done, and those two had to gel. And I taught negotiation for this group of people. And the most important thing was everybody kept saying, well, because I'm representing the company, I have to say this, or I'm expected to say this. But if I could really go and say what I think, then I would say something else. And all the constraints that were put on people on both sides of the table, obviously. And we were just in a training course. I don't want to see how terrible it was in the actual meetings where I was not allowed to attend because the government wouldn't allow for that. But the interesting thing is, how many of those times are we put into places where we don't feel joy? When I would also include things like flow. If you're in a wonderful conversation as we are now, we don't worry about how things are happening because we know we are feeding on and off each other through what we're doing. If you know that every time you open your mouth, you've got the name of your company on your forehead, and you have to make sure that you only say things that the company would consider in order for what was going on in the meeting. Look at all of the things that get lost for each individual. And there is no joy in that because they know they have to play by the rule book. And maybe they don't agree with what's in the rule book, or they have a better idea, but you're not allowed to say that. I've worked, unfortunately, with so many people in my life who couldn't always do the things that they wanted to. And I guess that's the reason I've had my own business for 37 years, because I've always wanted to be able to do as much as I can. Of course, when I talk to you, there are rules. And when I work with clients, there are rules. But there's so much more you can do if you can sit in a room with somebody and just talk about the things the way you really want to talk about them. And many, many people in their lives don't have a good opportunity to do that, and they're losing out on a lot of joy or enjoyment.
They
Yeah.
certainly are. And so I've got two examples, both of them professional. Oh, sorry, one of them professional and one of them kind of in a social setting, but it was a professional example. I was at a wedding and seated with people I didn't know. And so I said to this guy that was sitting opposite me, who was probably about the age I am now, so 60s, that sort of age. And I said, what do you do? You know, the opening question. He said, well, I'm retired, but I was an accountant for 45 years. And then he said, and I hated every single day. And I felt so sad because that's a lifetime gone.
Yes.
And yeah, so thank you for reminding me of
Yeah.
that sadness. The other one was I was the food and beverage director at a five-star hotel in London. And I said to my boss, I'm going to be out for a couple of hours this afternoon because we have a football soccer match.
Mhm.
And he said, What do you mean you have a soccer match? So I said, Well, it's partly about breaking down the barriers between the different departments. We've formed a soccer team, and we're playing another hotel. And he said, "Is it really for the benefit of the hotel?" So I was a bit, I didn't really know where he was coming from, and I just said, "Well, yes, of course it is." And he said, "Okay, as long as you don't enjoy yourself."
Oh, oh no.
Now, in Values Jam, Rhonda, there's an opportunity for you to create your own question about enjoyment.
Mhm.
So, using one of the words who, what, where, when, why, or how,
Mhm.
create a question, and then either you can give us the answer first, or else I can have a go and you can follow.
Okay. Well, I'll let you've been being so pleasant and letting me say so much, so I will give you the first opportunity. I think that's wonderful. And I love why questions because there's a school of thought that says you should always ask why questions. There's another school of thought that says you should never ask why questions. It's the one kind of question that I think most people don't understand. When you have a 2 or 3 year old, they're always asking why. And many people come to me and say, I can't stand it anymore. This kid keeps asking me why. And I say, but if you understand the reason for that, then it makes a lot of sense and you understand how important that is. The reason 2 to 3 year olds ask why is because they are building their grammar and vocabulary in their brain. And they learn very quickly. If you ask a question, what is this? You get one word. If you say, who is that? You get one word, the name of the person. If you ask why, you get lots and lots of words. And that's why a child will ask why again and again and again. The child probably isn't even in a position to understand most of what you're saying if it's very young, but it knows how to get the most input because it learns very quickly why is the best question to get lots and lots of input. So I
Okay.
will ask you a why question and then hope I will get lots and lots of input back, just like a 2 year old. So my question would be, why do you believe that the emphasis that you and I and many other people in the world are now placing on values is so essential given the geopolitical situation we're in at the moment?
Okay. So I find myself starting with the what was in place historically, which provided us with guidance in terms of behavior and character, were there are probably more things than this, but I find myself moving towards religion, and there are less people that are religious now than previously. Then the family unit.
Mhm.
And families have been diluted partly because people don't stay together so often, but partly because of geographic mobility as well. Families are no longer so close together, so that's not there for people. And then finally, local community was the third that comes to mind. And that has been diluted. And now you can very easily live in a neighborhood where I don't know why it's called a neighborhood actually anymore because you you don't know your neighbors, you don't really speak to your neighbors, and you don't have very much to do with your neighbors. So, in the absence of those three things, what is there actually that can provide us with that guidance? And for me, the answer is values.
Mhm.
And even if it's done only on an individual level, then that's a great start. But then at a community level, well, why not? And at an organizational level, then why not? So that's my first response to the reason why values are so important at this time. How does that resonate with your own thinking?
That's wonderful. And I would just add something on top of that that says many people, as you were speaking before about you sitting down and listening to music and how much that gives you just because you sit down and you hear the beauty and the joy of listening to the music. I think because our lives have become so interactive, and that's not always a good word, I was speaking to a colleague the other day online. She said, I can't believe it. My daughter and I were driving the car together, just the two of us, and she sent me a text message. And I think part of what has happened, where we used to have people, a religion, so you had a congregation of some point, of some course, you had a neighborhood, as you mentioned, you had some kind of a community. If that has all become very, I will call it fractionalized, if I see people sitting in a restaurant and they're texting each other, although they could see each other's faces and talk, that the idea of what's important now is not the person, it's the message. But you're missing out on so much what goes on with the people, and especially in a group of people. If two people are sitting in the car and one is just sending a text. And so I think something that has happened as the interaction among people has somehow been downgraded through the technology that we now have. And that we then say, I can talk to you just as easily now because we're on this call on Zoom
Yeah.
as I can with my husband or my neighbor or whoever else. And that we have expanded our lives so much. And I've been very fortunate to have been part of this and love the fact that at 65, I can be now talking to people and trying to make an impact on people all over the world and not just in my own street or wherever. I think that idea has somehow gone, it's sort of the pendulum, you know, we used to all be over here and now somehow we're all moving over to here where it's the technology is so much more important than the people. And I'm hoping we somehow sort of get back to the middle at some point where the technology is fantastic. I'm doing so much now with AI, for example, but I would never get rid of all of the people just because I have AI. But I think a lot of people just swing from one side of the pendulum to the other, and we forget that the middle is the golden place to be, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a great thought. And it also strikes me that we're really not particularly good at keeping focused on the end, and we get easily distracted to the means. So, and it's the same in business, you know, when what often happens in my experience with client organizations is that they they start and they have a very clear understanding of where they want to get to, so the end. But then they put in place all of the processes that are designed to get them to the end, but then get tied up and consumed with the processes
Yes.
and very quickly forget about the end. And so they end up serving the processes, but which actually don't take them to where they wanted to be from the outset. And I think that that kind of argument applies to what you're saying about the texting somebody. You know, you what you're wanting to do is to communicate with them, but you're missing the point by doing it in that way.
Mhm.
And that actually, this is touching on Values Jam, the game, because when Lisa Birtles and I created it, it was in response to a World Values Day planning session where people were saying, we think there needs to be a better way to drive values-driven conversation.
Mhm.
And everybody kind of agreed, but I think I might have asked the question, so what does that look like? And nobody could say. So I thought, well, let's invent this card game.
Mhm.
And then in one of the conversations I remember with Lisa, we talked about should we enable it from a tech perspective, you know? And that was kind of tempting because it feels like it's scalable and easy and convenient and all of that sort of stuff. But then I just thought to myself, no, actually, you're losing the very essence of what we're starting to create here. So, who wants to play Values Jam where, let's say, what we're looking at now, each other, is in a tiny square at the bottom of the screen,
Mhm.
and the screen is filled with the card or a representation of the logo or whatever it is
Yeah.
would be that would destroy it as far as we were concerned, and I'm so
Mhm.
delighted that we decided not to go down that route because it is it something to do with our inability to assess the true value of that human interaction.
I don't know if it's that we can't assess the value. I think we, especially a lot of young people I know, they get so caught up in what they can do with the technology which is so much more diverse than what you can do just by opening your mouth and talking to someone. Like if you're in the car with mom, this kind of thing, you can send it and you can put an emoji on it and it makes noises. And don't ask me all the millions of things that go on with that. I just spent some time with my team in South Africa and met all of them in person for the first time. And they're all in their late 20s and early 30s, and I'm 65. And it was like two worlds clashing with each other. I have never had my picture taken so many times in my life. It was a selfie for everything. Yeah. I've never even made a selfie on my own ever, so I didn't even know how that worked. But and I spoke at a conference and everybody was coming, "Oh, Ron, I need to take a picture with you." I'm not a picture person, first of all, in general, but secondly, I'm saying, and what are you going to do with all of that afterwards? But the thing that I remember is somebody putting her arm around me and saying, "That was a great conversation, Rhonda. Wow," and just hugged me. That's what I remember. I don't need to see the face. I have some other kind of an emotional reaction to that, which was very much more important for me. And this mixture of how do you do the tech and how do you do the emotional part and how do you put that together? I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, our generation does that very differently than people in their 30s because they've grown up with this and I didn't. And therefore, I always say it's not only a matter of what we're doing, it's how we experience that. And for me, that was kind of strange. And I was sitting there thinking, why does somebody need to take the 10th picture of me today? I don't really look any different than I did 4 hours ago or something. But for a lot of people, that's the way their memory works. And my memory works maybe in a different way. I'm not quite sure what that is, but that's what I'm noticing a lot about when people are trying to communicate. Finding the right channel or the right method or the right means has become much more important than what we're actually saying, going back to the process or the end. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm thinking that this might still come back to that point about the indefinability of the emotion that you described, and somebody from a different generation saying, "Well, I've got photos. That's how I'll remember how good," so that there's a slightly different perspective there. And I'm a keen photographer, and so I get where you're coming from here around photographs. I went on a photography day last spring, and it's in ancient woodland, and they have owls that are captive owls, but they bring them into this woodland area and then allow them to fly around, and you can take photos of them. So it's not, totally authentic, but perhaps a better chance of getting a good shot than if
Yeah.
you went into the wild. But I remember the reason I mention it is because I remember seeing this barn owl flying through the trees and actually just lowering my camera and watching it and just enjoying. It was such a beautiful flight and it was so smooth. And I didn't need, yes, I did get some photographs as well, but in just that singular moment, I didn't need to take a photograph. I just wanted to enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
So I think that's backing up what you were saying there around the difference between capturing and enjoying.
Well, and it's also making sure that you respect people. I worked for many years with a Japanese client, and he was living in Germany, and I helped him both with his English and with his German because in the company he needed to be able to speak some German, but when he reported things back to Japan, he had to be able to do the things with English with the people in the company and then report back. And one day he came into my office. He didn't live very far from me. He could walk. And he came in and I had never seen him look so terrible in my entire life. And I looked at him and I said, "Don't you feel well?" And he said, "No, no, no, Bowen-san, everything is fine. Always Bowen-san." Yeah. And I said, "So what is it that we want to do today?" And he said, "Well, normally today would be our day for German, but since I'm not feeling so well, I think today I'd rather speak English." I said, "Fine. It's your session. You get to do whatever you like." And I said, "So what is it that we need to talk about today?" He said, "Bowen-san, you have to teach me how to tell people that I don't feel good because my grandmother in Japan died." And the touchy-feely part of me that wanted to just reach out and hug him. And I sat there, and if I could have done it physically, I would have slapped my hand. You know, I was sitting there and holding myself back and trying to be totally respectful of his culture and making sure that I would never, ever touch him for any reason. Okay, I would shake his hand sometimes when we were in a group with Germans because everybody was doing the German thing. That was okay. But otherwise, I would have never touched this gentleman physically because I knew that that was something that wasn't easy for him. And then I sat there and I said, what are you going to do to express the emotion you have without doing something that oversteps the boundaries for him and his culture? And he's the one who's suffering at the moment. You're supposed to be the support person in this situation. So all I did was I looked at him and I said, you know, and I'd never met his grandmother, so I didn't have any background about his grandmother. But I said, well, what may be helpful for people is if you know how to explain how the whole process of funerals works in Japan. Because I said, you may have very different traditions or certain ways of doing things. I said, I'm not familiar with how that works in Japan. And maybe if you just explained that to people and if you had a good way to talk about it, then they wouldn't be asking you lots of questions that maybe you don't feel comfortable saying. So maybe what we can do is find a really good way for you to explain what happens at at any Japanese funeral, and then you don't have to talk so much about your grandmother. So that's what we did. We went through and we practiced and you learned all the words for all the different things that we never talk about in other languages normally. It's a very difficult thing also as far as the vocabulary is concerned. But the very nice thing that happened was a year later, his parents came to visit.
Mhm.
And the Japanese, as you may know, are wonderful at not only having presents, but wrapping them elaborately and doing all these things. And I took them all out for dinner. And they brought a picture that his grandmother had made and gave it to me as a gift.
Oh,
And then you know you've done the values right.
yeah,
Then you know that for him, respect was a very important thing.
yeah.
And that you found the way to make sure that in that moment, his values were more important. And I was being respectful of what he wanted and helping him get what he needed, which was how to talk to the colleagues. And it really paid off. And I still have it hanging in my bedroom. It's a picture of a geisha that she made by hand, quilted with stuffing, with hair, with eyes, with all of these things. This beautiful picture that his grandmother had made.
It's a beautiful story. And there's something about Japanese culture. I've been to Japan a number of times. I was particularly struck by the innate sense of service in Japan, and I learnt about a motonashi, which is translated into English hospitality.
Mhm.
But a Japanese lady described it as more meaningfully meaning
Mhm.
taking personal pleasure from paying attention to fine detail in delivering a service,
Mhm.
which I still sends a stand makes my hair on the back of my neck stand up because it's just such a brilliant way to describe it. And yet, another colleague of mine described Japanese culture as in not particularly glowing terms, actually. And I've never been able to rationalize the two of, on the one hand, all of the tradition around a motonashi where you're making the very best situation of this moment between two people at this moment in time. And then this other colleague's experience of Japan not being a very nice place to be at all. Um, Not necessarily to get into that, but maybe a quick comment from you on that seemingly um, dichotomy of a single culture. What's that about?
Well, again, it's back to what happened in the experience and what did the person with those two individuals, what did each of them value before? they went into the experience. So when I was in Japan, I also loved the fact people took very good care of me. Total strangers took very good care of me. I had no problems with that whatsoever. But it's a little bit about, what you put out is what comes back. And it could be if the second person you mentioned was in a situation where things were not working well, or he or she was confused or didn't understand something, and it came across that way. And Japanese people, as far as I've been able to see, pick up very much on very, very nuanced things that are happening, not because they don't want to talk, but because they are always in a group mode and they're very conscious of what's happening to everybody in the room and not just individuals. And if the person you were referring to was very much individual and thought everything is about me, that maybe was the reason why. No, when you're in the group, everybody in the group, it used to be, I don't know in Japan how companies are handling this now, but years ago, if you came into a company in year one, in year three, everybody got promoted that year. Everybody, no matter what. And that may be something if the person was coming from a Western thing and saying, no, I'm me and I want to be treated like me. That's not necessarily what happens in Japanese culture.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that.
Mhm.
And it's made me this often happens in values jam conversations, and you've used a number of examples today from the past, including the most recent one. And people frequently say, "Oh my goodness, this is something that hasn't crossed my mind for a decade or more. I've not spoken about this." And I ended up speaking to a psychologist in New Zealand, and what he told me was that perhaps, and it wasn't a confirmation, it was more of an indication. He said perhaps because values-based conversations go so deep, maybe what's happening is that previously lapsed neural pathways are being re-sparked, and that's what's bringing either a memory from the depths or maybe even bringing a memory that was lost into existence again. So as a result of that, we've started to have conversations with organizations in the Alzheimer's and dementia space.
Excellent.
And we I've not been able to progress this yet, but I sense that I don't know what your knowledge of senior living settings is, but mine isn't particularly positive, where you have elderly people that play crass games of bingo to keep them occupied for an
Yeah.
now imagine instead of that an elderly person having a values jam with a fellow resident and talking about enjoyment and their memories of their lives,
Mhm.
or with a caregiver or with a visitor.
Mhm.
I just feel that it's going to be, and it's a question of when, not if, it will create enormous value in that space. Pun not intended there.
Yeah. The other thing, going back to values jam and music, is I live 5 minutes from the border to the Netherlands. And so I get a lot of input from things that are happening with Dutch colleagues and what things are happening for them. And the Dutch, in comparison to a lot of the German things, a lot of German senior citizens places are places I would not also want to be in, as you were mentioning. But this woman does music therapy by only going in and taking someone, either taking a device like a cassette recorder or something, but taking music from the time, because there is research that the time when you're a teenager is the time that the music you love is instilled in you and that stays for the rest of your life. And even if you don't remember what happened 2 hours ago, if somebody plays your favorite song from whenever, when you were young, they will all come up, they will all sing, they'll stand up and dance, they will do all of these things that are beneficial also for their body, because you're touching the part of their brain that is so deep. It's like when you look at the senses, if you smell something, because smell is the only sense that goes directly to the inner part of your brain, nothing else does. Anytime you smell something, that automatically ticks certain things off. And music is another one of those things. And this woman goes from place to place and helps people learn how to do this kind of music and how that can energize the people and bring them to doing things that they all say, oh, I can't dance anymore, but boy, you play my favorite song, and guess what?
Yeah.
They're looking for somebody to dance with. So that's another way where we can really say something that's from our past that is so ingrained and that we love so much. When that comes out, that gives us the opportunities and the ways to go forward and do things that we thought we couldn't do anymore. And I think, especially for the elderly, that's a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. And isn't it fascinating still how much we don't understand about our brains?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, now I'm conscious of time, so it's time to bring. I can't believe that the time has flown so fast. But the final question I have for you, for a short answer is, what are you encouraged to do differently about enjoyment as a result of this conversation today?
I think for me personally, I don't think I want to change anything about how I personally enjoy things, but I want to be more aware of how many other different forms of enjoyment there are. Because just because I prefer something or I like to do it or it makes me feel good doesn't mean, as we go back to your Japanese description, that it's the same for everyone. And to be more conscious of when I'm actually out and I want people to be feeling joy, what that means to them, and that we have to tailor situations or experiences or ways of doing things to make sure that everybody in the room gets an opportunity to feel joy, because there may be very different ways of tapping into that, and to become more conscious of what that means.
Great. And mine is so my personal definite. I mentioned at the beginning that enjoyment is one of my core values. And the definition of it for me is to remember how lucky I am to be doing whatever I'm doing.
Hmm?
And I'm just, although I do remind myself of that regularly, I don't think you can remind yourself of it regularly enough.
Exactly.
So, tomorrow morning, that's going to be what I remember, so that I get a whole day's worth of it, to focus on enjoyment and doing just that. So, Rhonda, thank you so much for this values jam. It's been a really deep, rich conversation. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been a wonderful way to share, and we've co-created such a wonderful package of value, we hope, for everyone who gets the chance to see this.
Bye now.
Bye.